Um, every time I open up this book or one of the other book or the phenomenology, I find my place in the other book. Strangely enough, I know that sounds
I open up this.
wacky, but that's kind of how it happens. Like, um, sense perception is pretty simple, and its result is being what the object is. But you get into perception, and you can see him running through the shapes of thought all the way into essence, like more concretely, I guess you could say. And so, he's talking about the world of appearance. Maybe that's with force and the understanding. I forget, but well, actually, Alex was just talking about the force and the understanding in phenomenology with stuff in the essence. So yeah, there's crossovers between the two books. Um, that if you've only read one book or the other, I mean, it's not like he points it out every step of the way. But you get into phenomenology and you've already read a couple chapters in the logic. Being nothing and becoming. Well, no, it's not like it's not like thought is going through the science. The result is just the shape, the immediate shape. So you get to the end of sense certainty and you get the category being. But the category being is not fully developed until the logic. So it just sort of stops and you move on to perception. And what being is a universal. And perception's immediate shape is a universal. It's expecting its object to be a universal until, of course, it develops and it becomes more than just a universal, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, it's like the thing they claim is supposed to be thesis, antithesis, synthesis, but it's more accurate to the real triad that we find.
Right. Immediacy, negation, speculation, and
Yeah, I mean,
speculation, and
yeah,
yeah, and
you can kind of see a correlation there, but it feels like what we're dealing with is the better determination of what that thesis, antithesis, ball is starting to get at.
yeah,
Thesis being antithesis, negation, and then synthesis being speculation. Yeah. Very vaguely connected, but it's like I said, it's like it's starting to get at the point, but it doesn't develop it and it formulates it. This is what Fichte did. So
I haven't read the Ficta, but my impression is that the I has a thesis, has an antithesis, and has a synthesis, whereas Hegel is like, get rid of the I. Thought has itself, but thought uh, thinks itself. Like the reason that the very first sentence is kind of a run on, like a fragment, right? It's with sense certainty you have consciousness thinking its object, or experiencing its object. That's a better way to put it, right? It experiences its object, which of course is itself, but it doesn't know that. And so it looks at this here and now, right? When thought thinks itself, um, it's another way of saying, like Fichte's, I think, right? And Hegel's like, no, 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 take it back. And that's the most abstract, and that's thought thinking itself. And then, you know, um, and then the first is the opening proposition, which is negated but preserved, uh, and the negation plus the preserved moment, is the speculative moment, is what well, not is what thought is for itself, right? The truth of the truth of being is determinate being, and so forth. So the object at the end of the speculation in the phenomenology isn't actually the shape of consciousness um, that takes over next. It's simply the next subject object, I guess you could say, because at the end it's being. But then he calls the next shape of next shape of consciousness perception. You know, why does he call it perception? Um, what what is that leap? What does he explain it? I forget. I don't remember.
Yeah,
I've
I
been
haven't.
bur- I've been buried in the Hoolgate a little bit more than the. Uh, I mean, I read the phenomenology chapter. Um, yes, the shape of consciousness has its object. Once it gets to the true of sense certainty, that true object is taken up by perception and so forth as its immediate shape. Okay. Yeah. Rock on.
I'm just for the heck of it. I know Hegel.net has their little triangle.
Yeah. You can share your screen too if you want. It might um, give us a little visualization. I'm sure Hoolgate somewhere writes out where the crossover and connection is because I keep trying to put it in my thought, right? Consciousness experiences its object. Um, so, yeah. Consciousness experiences its object. And through the experience, the object becomes more true for consciousness. But the truest shape is left for the next shape.
I think you can't see the Buckeridian spiral from this format, but
No, you can't. But um, that's okay.
yeah.
So P1. Well, yeah.
So sorry. Yeah.
No, you're fine. I makes sense. Okay, so turning to the logic, what are we looking at?
Looking at real measure, which is realized because it takes into account both. I guess I'm trying to remember exactly what that was. More realized, more direct ratio. I do remember it comes to the fact that space and time are involved.
Yeah,
So space, I guess, yeah, being the extent aspect of it.
Talked about velocity, the ratio of
Yeah.
space and then time.
yeah,
And of course, they come together to form a real measure, which itself is independent and yet a unity of
measured.
Yeah.
of the previous measures, like being a. Well, I had the word there for just seconds. Oh yeah, because they are both active moments in that real measure, and yet itself is independent of those two in the same time.
Yeah,
And yet those things continue their independence in their being moments. And so the example we get to in terms of the first that he really exemplifies real measure, which I'll be starting off with because it's easier to visualize. The example as it goes on will be density and then its related specific gravity, where specific gravity is just a relationship, is the ratio of two densities.
Yeah. Usually like density of of a substance versus say density of water.
Right, and it's the common one. Water always being the base unit of a lot of these.
Yeah. And if you want to zoom out a little, you can see that these are this is the context and sort of the use that the category of measure is put to in real world applications. And the shape of the measure that it actually consists of.
I'm also trying to think exactly how to bring this back in, but remember, a measure is both got two concurrent moments that will always continue up through real measure to delineate two different aspects that we have to review of measure. One being it's a quality, and one being a quantity. The quality itself is inherent internal. Quantity itself is the quality that is in fact an external to the quality. And
Yeah.
so itself has its own properties. Like, for example, we'll see that quantities, even if we go into like a density itself that is always fixed, the quantitative aspect still has shown from prior in this process that it is changeable in some fashion.
And he talks about unit and amount.
Right. Right. So what we have then here, I'm trying to think how it's best exemplified through starting off with densities. We do have a mass, it's mass over volume. Mass itself is an inherent property, so itself is something aspect of the something itself, and then its extent is in sort of its
Volume. Yeah.
externalizing of itself is through space, which is in its volume. And so those two moments are together do make up density. And through this we do see that in fact this is exemplified that the density is this particular mass over this particular volume that basically defines this as being qualitatively different than other densities. Even being like two different metals have two different densities because they have this different inherent relationship. Yeah, mass being the amount and volume being the units. And this
Right.
in this common circumstance. Yeah.
So amount is the mass, and the unit is the volume, the extent.
Right. Commonly, yes. And according to Hegel, because I haven't read Philosophy of Nature yet, he does have examples where that is also flipped, where the volume is the amount and the mass is the unit, but we commonly think about it the first way.
Yeah. Well, it is dialectical, so
Yeah, well, we did talk about how the amount unit would flip anyways, and how under quantum itself, it pretty much was reversible directly there.
I wonder if that reversal is something that Marx jokingly refers to when he says he puts Hegel back on his feet. Something like that, because if that's the case with nature or spirit, where you flip the relationship between the natural and the measure in nature, I mean, that's pretty significant.
Yeah.
Does Hoolgate say flip the relationship?
I think that'd be
Something
my
like that?
phrasing, but he does say that he does show that it Oh, there it is. Though in his philosophy of nature, Hegel maintains that these terms can also reverse their function. So yeah, essentially flip. And density can be measured in terms of volume per unit of mass.
Wait, say that again. Density can be measured in terms of.
Of volume per unit of mass. So volume would be the amount.
Yes. So, like, you look at a star and it's denser, and that means that there's more mass per volume, right?
Right.
Yes. Okay, there it is. Oh, that's cool. I'm sorry. I love science, but I am forever getting math wrong, and so like to be able to visualize that is not easy for me. But when I get it, I get it. Density is more mass per volume.
Right.
Like, it's denser. The number go the density index goes up, the volume mass goes, or the volume unit goes down while the mass goes up.
Well, I think they can be changed relatively.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm thinking because air itself can have the same amount of mass, but temperature causes the volumes to be different.
In other words, the air moves.
Yeah,
So you have a, yeah. So if the temperature causes the air to spread out because it got hotter.
yeah, the energy makes that the air molecules bounce off each other more.
Yeah.
That's the underlying quality that makes the volume itself quantitatively different.
So it is like the temperature. So
Yeah.
the air is the mass,
Mhm.
and its temperature goes up or down, its volume changes, and there's your cold front, there's your heat wave. So on
Yeah,
and so
there's
forth.
your air parcel that lifts off that eventually starts kicking off to supercells.
Yeah. That is freaking cool.
Yeah,
All
it's
right.
going back and thinking about this stuff again.
Man, that is so freaking cool. Okay. So, and real measure,
Mhm.
um, you said you got up to the remark.
Right. And then the remark is just going deeper into how the chemistry aspect that he does at the very end with the effective affinities. But, so the direct ratio will be the amount that gives something its independence, and a unit its immediate measure that forms one side of a real measure. Thus consists in direct ratio between the amount that gives something its independence and the unit of its externality. So again, that's exemplified by its independence being mass and its unit of externality, which is volume, because remember that's what actually is how it interacts with the world, is that it has a volume.
Yes.
It
It's
has
it's
space.
extension. Yeah.
And so and then of course that then defines an exponent, which itself is still independent, but also related to its components.
Right.
So you can, again, it's the same thing where the ratio up and can of mass to volume can change, but its density for like a solid will not change.
Yeah.
But of course, I guess at that point it also defines equality there, because for a liquid you can still have expansion with that change. You don't have it as much with a solid, but you still, I guess, you have to do a little.
That would be the coefficient, wouldn't it? Or the not the coefficient, but the what's the result um in this context?
Well, I mean, this is the exponent part.
Yeah, yeah. So like density would be the exponent. Like you have, yeah, you have mass and you have volume, and they equal the exponent density.
Right.
Yep.
So
Right.
quantitatively, they're going to be equal. Also, they do happen. The only way they're different, and what makes it independent, is it's a different quality than its components.
Yeah.
They all have their own independence, even though the density still has the moments of mass and volume within it.
So real measure is like the king of kings of measure.
Yeah, and I think eventually we get to a point where we have, I'm trying to remember where that starts. We do have the ratio of real measures to each other. So then you have a real measure that's real measures, which
Okay.
I guess we do get with special gravity, because that's the ratio of densities, which again is commonly whatever you're measuring to water, but not necessarily.
Just put her food away.
Okay.
Oh, so however, that quantum can become qualitative in another way, because they owe this determinant C to the limit that marks one off each one from another.
Hmm.
Because to a certain extent, the density itself, in a way, excludes it from something else. So it's this rather than that. Like density of this metal is always this to the exclusion of something in with the other being to say this other metal which has its own density.
Or the air around it,
Yeah.
which would have its own density and have its own effects on the metal, although measurably less than, say, if the metal was water. And then the higher temperature in the air would heat up the water more efficiently than, say, a metal, I'm guessing. Or maybe less? I don't know.
I think that starts getting to the chemistry part a little bit more, but that's again related to this section.
Yeah.
Because
And
different combinations will react differently to that's where the explicit exclusion occurs. Well, because like say you combine acid X with base A versus Y to A, they have different affinities, but you're only able to compare them in the fact that they're reacting to the same thing, but they are still to the exclusion. So you can't have one unit of this base and expect there to be a ratio between X and Y in there. X is going to exclusively take over and not let Y react to anything, which is commonly, but I think that's the example where where the qualitative and the quantitative and exclusive affinity are can be unrelated to each other. You have to have both to define the actual measure.
now, okay.
That's skipping a lot ahead.
Yeah.
But go ahead. Your question, sorry.
Not really a question. I'm just still trying to think through.
Water
Like,
it's a specificity. That's the actual word I guess I should have been using, not exclusive for the density.
mm-hmm.
It just specifies that it's this density rather than that other density. So water is practically always one, which because water is the defining definition for the base unit of density commonly. So I
Water.
think it's like 1 gram per milliliter is the definition. That's why you can measure cups of water directly with weight because it's defined as a direct one.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so like 10 grams of water is 10 milliliters.
Okay.
That's how you measure. That's how I weigh coffee when I make coffee.
Or
Right?
we could go with the imperial pound and stop
Wow.
screwing around with those made up names.
With those cultural Marxist metric trying to take us.
That's right. Cultural Marxist, exactly. Measure is now determined as a correlation of measures which constitute the quality of distinct self-subsistent somethings or things. Yeah.
And
Notice the passive voice there. Measure is now determined as,
right.
right?
It's not I determine.
No, it's we are letting thought determine itself, and so measure is now determined as a correlation of measures, and so forth. Hi, sweetie.
Did you
You ready for bed?
Did you get a lollipop for me?
No. Hang on.
No worries. Let's figure it out.
Love you. Okay. Brush your teeth after the sucker. You get me? Love you. Good night.
Yeah, I'm just
So yeah, thought thinking itself.
right.
Thought determining itself. It's probably a more what? Yeah, I'll put that in the refrigerator when I'm done. All right. Good night. Love you.
All
The
right.
relations of measure just considered concern abstract qualities like space and time. Those now about to be considered are exemplified in specific gravity and later on in chemical properties, i.e., in determinations characteristic of material existence.
Oh, I see. Wait.
Space and time are also moments of such measures, but their relationship no longer depends simply on their own nature because they are now subordinated to further determinations.
So what page was that? Sorry.
It's page 348. I'm just
Oh.
reading out. I'm just reading out chapter 2's like opening lines and trying to make a little bit more sense of them. I know we're well past that, or not well past that, but you know.
Right.
Um.
Well, but so we let the qualitative moment of real measure determine itself as specified real measure.
Yeah. So you have specific quantity, you have real measure, and then, I mean, it says the becoming of essence, but where's the speculative moment? Is it real measure? I don't think it is. I think it's
measureless.
Yeah, maybe it's measureless. Indifference is inverse ratio of its factors. Whoa.
Or more specifically, the infinity of measure. Huh.
Yeah. Like, it actually doesn't have a chapter of its own that's called, like, the infinity of measure. Being is the abstract equivalence for which, since it is to be thought of by itself as being, the expression indifference has been employed, in which there is supposed to be as yet no determinations of any kind. Okay, page 373. Surveying the progressive determinations which measure has passed through, we can summarize them as follows. Measure is, in the first instance, only the immediate unity of quality and quantity as an ordinary quantum number, which is, however, specific. As thus a specific quantity, which is related not to another but to itself, it is essentially a ratio. It therefore also contains its moments as sublated and undivided within itself, as is always the case in a notion. The difference in the ratio is present in such a manner that each of its moments is itself a unity of quality and quantity. The difference, therefore, is real and yields a number of measure relations which, as formal totalities in themselves, are self-subsistent. The two series formed by the sides of these ratios are the same constant arrangement for each individual member, which is belonging to one side enters into relationship with all the members of the opposite series. This unity as a mere arrangement is still quite external, and although it shows itself to be an immanent specifying unity of a self-subsistent measure, distinguished from its specifications, it is not yet the free notion, which alone gives its differences in immanent determination. It is as yet only a substrate, a material and for its differentiation into totalities, i.e., into differences embodying the nature of the unchanged substrate, it is dependent solely on the external quantitative determination, which shows itself as the same at the same time as a difference of quality. In this unity of the substrate with itself, the measured determination is sublated, and its quality is an external state determined by the quantum. This process is equally the progressive determination of measure in its realization and also the reduction of measure to the status of a moment.
That's kind of to the point where the quantitative aspect of measure in its infinity represents some kind of implicit essence of the quality, right? Of the something that has a quality. That's what it almost seems like it's going to me. All right, so I think that the point just briefly was it said that the only way, like the quantitative moment of the initial real measure is, well, we know it's fixed because density, but we know it has to be able to change because it's a quantum, and so the only way that really happens is combination of say the densities together. It's a brief thing I can think about that was interesting was because the masses combine together because that's intrinsic property to something, the volume isn't, so the volumes are not expected to be able to add together. But volume is not what makes it distinct and independent. Something is rather a moment of the thing that gives it the quality of being external to itself or extended. So it's always determined by the actual combination.
Yeah. And the combination just depends on your materials. All materials have a saturation point when dealing with other materials. And all combinations are different.
Right.
Something like that.
Relate more to one other thing, since it's not just something in relation to another, but also a quantum that is a one. And as we know, a one is always one of many, indeed of infinitely many. And this is where we start, what is it? This aspect of real measure starts to show itself as a series of related measures. And yeah, is this the part where X and Y relate to different, like, and this is where I guess the process of the combination starts to show up where X will, if you imagine density of X is related to densities A, B, and C, and how it relates to X to A, X to B, etc., and the way they combine is different than Y to A, Y to B, Y to C, etc. And you can only really compare X to Y in this new way by how it relates to A, B, and C. But it doesn't make as much sense for density until you start thinking about it as a density of chemicals, only in the fact that the qualitative aspect of these chemical reactions then makes it exclusive. Which I feel like I skipped over a lot, even just saying that.
No, you're fine.
But it's just pretty much that these relations between these measures as they combine to each other, and then how those combinations relate to each other.
Yeah.
And then we start to see like that X to A, X to B starts to become can be exclusive only if the qualitative relationship makes it exclusive.
Yes.
But for densities, it's exclusive incompletely because it can still combine further while, say, an acid and a base completely changes its quality in its neutralization, which prohibits further combinations.
Yes. In other words, if two saturate each other, you introduce a third, it's going to be a third in there.
And
sort of like when you combine different drinks or beers, you get your Irish, well, you get your black and tan,
Yeah.
But you can't put a third in there without it being wildly different of a drink, and then it just sort of ruins it. I don't know. It stops being a black and tan. Never mind. Mm.
What is it? I thought that was interesting with these being exclusive unities, and the way was that in their combination they are negative each other, but they immediately go from that to being a negation to being a negation of negation without there actually being a chance for the negation to take effect. They're just
Yeah.
negative. The two measures are negative to each other, if they still remain independent. And this negation to each other itself is a negation between each other. So it forms the unity itself between these don't actually form yet another unity. It's just a further determination of the same unity.
Okay.
The unity is specified or negated, so itself the negation of two measures, yet it is not just a negation, these to an extent preserves itself in it, and is thus in respect the affirmative unity of these two measures. It's like a further determination of the unity we just had.
What page is that?
It's Holgate 298.
Oh, okay. Gotcha.
It just makes more sense to a certain extent than going back to Hegel himself at this point. What was that? Effective unity. Where does he say it exactly? Because I'm trying to. Oh, both are posited as negative in the relation in the 354, and since in this each preserves itself as indifferent toward the other, its negation is also in turn negated. This their qualitative unity is thus a subsubsistent exclusive units. It is only as exclusive that the exponents, which are primarily comparative numbers of the members of the series, have in them their genuine specific determinants relative to one another. And now you have a plurality of these relationships because of determined by that, and that's where you get again one many out of one. And we again get to the chemical relationship we just talked about multiple times already.
Yeah.
And that leads to a nodal number, I believe, or that derived actually in that section. Because it's an exclusive number of many different relationships. So X chemical to A, X to B, X to C, etc.
Yeah. What is a nodal line?
That's still haven't figured that out. I haven't read that far yet, and I don't know if it's was it nodal. A node and lines on this. The nodes are the points where a thick line meets a thin line. I don't think that makes sense.
In resonance of a two-dimensional surface or membrane, such as a drumhead, lines on the surface where the surface is motionless, dividing the surface into separate regions vibrating with opposite phase.
Almost reminds me of the thing where you could vibrate like a drum and you can see the kind of waves show up in there, and then you see the next set of waves as it builds up, or like the sands that form. You vibrate the square thing it's on, and it forms these specific waves of like, positive and negative relationship.
Yeah. So there's nodal and antinodal. The wave where particle vibration is at its strongest is called the antinode wave.
Interesting. Oh, because we've already in this process determined this exclusivity of where X and A itself is exclusive X to B, etc. So that's why it's nodal. They're still related in this discontinuity, but there's still this relationship of a line that it forms. Where X, and that's how you also, I guess, quantitatively how you get more and more to less relationship, because they're discontinuous. It's no longer a continual line. So you get the relationship X to A is greater than X to B, which is greater than X to C. So it's X and A is more than X to B. And X to B is less, has a less strong relationship than X to A.
Right.
That's where more or less it came in for that moment. So yeah, because that's a discontinuous line, that's what makes it a nodal line because it bunches up in certain areas. That's my best guess right now.
Okay.
Looking at the Wikipedia article on science of logic, and it says
Oh,
to give some examples. One example is natural numbers consist of a series of numbers that gradually increase by one in perpetual succession. However, some of those numbers relate in specific ways to others, being their multiple or power or root, etc.
Yeah.
Those constitute nodes. And another example given is transition from liquid to frozen state of water. It's not a it doesn't occur gradually. It occurs, when you get to 0 degrees centigrade, it's pretty sudden.
Yeah.
it unmeasured magnitude where it then exceeds its mere change in size renders it liable to corruption in the same constitution with good fortune and its strength before its expansion. This, contrary to Husserl's doctrine that nature doesn't affect its saltum, according to Hegel, nature does make leaps.
Yep.
Yes, it does.
Yeah.
The quality changes after enough of the quantity has. And so forth. That's Thomas Kuhn. Although I think that man cribbed from Hegel and
He stole from a lot of people.
and burned his notes. Yeah.
Makes sense. So the relationships you see start to bundle up itself is nodal because they accumulate in specific spots but not in others. And so like the relation, the thirds itself are nodals in the number line.
Is there a fractal connection there? Because like fractals make shapes that are very specific, but the fractal isn't like a uniform shape throughout, or is it?
It doesn't have to be. Except there are nodal two-band model. I guess I don't know.
Oh God, sorry. Getting sick again. In thinking about the gradualness of the coming to be of something, it is ordinarily assumed that what comes to be is already sensibly or actually in existence. It is not yet perceptible only because of its smallness. Similarly, with the gradual disappearance of something, the non-being or the other, which takes its place, is likewise assumed to be really there, but not yet observable, and there, too, not in the sense of being implicitly or ideally contained in the first something, but really there, not only not observable. In this way, coming to be and ceasing to be lose all meaning. That is to say, the form of the in itself, the inner being of something before it actually exists, is transformed into a smallness of an outer existence, and the essential difference, that of the notion, is converted into an external difference of mere magnitude. I think he's talking about infinitesimals or trying to parse through it. Page 370.
Oh, okay, that's right.
Sorry, the paragraph before, he says, it is said, natura non facit saltum. And ordinary thinking, when it has to grasp a coming to be or ceasing to be, fancies it has done so by representing it as a gradual emergence or disappearance. But we have seen that the alterations of being in general are not only the transition of one magnitude into another, but a transition from quality into quantity and vice versa, a becoming other, which is an interruption of gradualness in the production of something qualitatively different from the reality which perceived it. In other words, leaps. Water in cooling does not gradually harden as if thickened like porridge, gradually solidifying until it reaches the consistency of ice. It suddenly solidifies all at once. It can remain quite fluid, even at freezing point, if it is standing undisturbed, and then a slight shock will bring it into the solid state. And I mean all at once.
Yeah,
so you're looking at a lake, and it's freezing, but it's difficult to say when exactly it will solidify, even using precise measures, because I mean you're dealing with different densities. You've got the water, you've got the air around it.
Of course, you can super cool water to a point, not only because it doesn't have a chance yet to condense. So it's like
Yeah,
the water's just sort of there, then you sort of smack it and it immediately freezes in seconds
yeah,
because it suddenly has something to coalesce around.
yeah. And I think the point he's making is that the idea that the the idea that these small reforms, I'm saying reform and it's a social category, but it
Yeah.
reminds me of the second internet. I'm putting on my trot hat for a second. This is the couple pages I should show to any gradualist social democrat who thinks that if we pile up enough reforms, suddenly we'll have communism. And right here, in the measure being what it is and its nature, right? It's not just dependent on uh,
Interesting. So,
social change. Probably, I'm not going to say probably. Social change follows the same dialectic of measure as put out here. Okay, which is why, even if you have the best well-oiled Second International, pushing the German Reichstag ever forward towards socialism. Um, if you if you imagine the social process as gradual only, you'll never get there. Like your your way of looking at your party's program um, will be self-defeating. Sorry, I'm speculating in the vulgar sense here.
Well,
I'm trying to connect the two together, and it's
and Doug Green did a whole lecture on Edward Bernstein and revisionism.
yeah.
Yeah, of course, fits in what what he was writing on Kautsky as well.
Yeah, there's a reason Trotsky and Lenin uh, basically said that you've got to hew to the revolutionary program. Um, Sorry, I'm starting to lose it. Uh, in thinking about the gradualness of the coming to be of something, communism, let's say, it is ordinarily assumed that what comes to be is already sensibly or actually in existence. It is not yet perceptible only because of its smallness. Um, and then I go down the page on 370. The attempt to explain coming to be of communism on the base of the gradualness of the alteration is tedious like any tautology. What comes to be or ceases to be is assumed as already complete and in existence beforehand, and the alteration is turned into a mere change of an external difference, with the result that the explanation is in fact a mere tautology. The intellectual difficulty attendant on such an attempted explanation comes from the qualitative transition from something, capitalism, into its other in general, communism, right? And then into its opposite. But the identity and the alteration are misrepresented as the indifferent external determinations of the quantitative sphere. In other words, reform after reform after reform, Zeno's paradox, you never actually get there through the gradualness. Oh, it's like he's reading my mind. The next paragraph, in the moral sphere, insofar it is considered under the categories of being, there occurs the same transition from quantity into quality, and differences and different qualities appear to be based on a difference of magnitude. It is through a more or less It is through a more or less that the measure of frivolity or thoughtlessness is exceeded and something quite different comes about, namely crime, and thus right becomes wrong and virtue vice. Thus, states too acquire, through their quantitative difference, other things being assumed equal, a distinct qualitative character. With the expansion of the state and an increased number of citizens, the laws and the Constitution acquire a different significance. The state has its own measure of magnitude, and when this is exceeded, this mere change of size renders it liable to instability and disruption under that same Constitution which was its good fortune and its strength before its expansion. So Rome is the obvious example, which I think he gets into in other writings, I'm guessing. I forget. But Rome is the big one because Rome got too big, and its Republican character. I think it was its Republican character had to change, or it couldn't.
Yeah.
It couldn't turn over into a stable, larger entity. Yes, I'll be right back.
Okay, absolute difference. Wow, that's going to be interesting.
Keep talking. I'll be right back.
And going back into natural sciences, that's Stephen Jay Gould's book, Panda's Thumb, is a essay there on dialectics and biology. And basically, he addresses the issue of gradualness versus discontinuous kind of changes. I mean, that was part of his beef with a lot of the evolutionary biology of all this time was a lot of it was he felt it was too gradualist and didn't place enough emphasis on sudden leaps. No, of course, a sudden leap in evolutionary biology might be a few million years, but I mean, his whole theory, the theory that he and Niles Eldredge developed a punctuated equilibrium was basically, a dialectical view of evolution. And Gould pretty much says that. That's how he viewed it.
Interesting. Jeez, God, it's been such a long time since I read Gould, and that was
He was all well in terms of background. He was basically a red diaper baby. So
ironic. I was the exact opposite at the time I read it, though.
we said that he had Gould says he had a Marxist background. Eldridge did not, but they were in agreement on how evolution worked, though. That was a dialectical process.
Okay, I'm just trying to get something to add to my list, I guess. My ever expanding list to read.
Yeah, that reminds me another thing that it's either Hegel or Hugel say in their phenomenology or their guide to it. He says that consciousness suffers the dialectic that it has in looking at its object. And one of these days I'll remember how to say it exactly right, but suffering the dialectic is an interesting way to put that. You know what I mean?
No, I think what time is it? Oh, it's almost 9 Eastern. So
Yeah.
Did you want us to just finish off in actuality real measure next time, or do you just want to consider that done tonight? I don't think we got to measure anyway, or measure the list, did we?
No.
No. So we're going from page 366, nodal lines of measure relations.
Mhm.
So 366 through 374.
Yep, it's not a lot, but it's also
No.
to be a lot.
Well, it's only 8 pages, and you have the whole gate because we're still in being. So, but yeah, we'll be going from the nodal lines. I'm just reading it out, sorry. Nodal lines of measure relations. The remark, nature does not make leaps, which we already talked about a little bit today. And then the measureless. And we'll stop at 374. If you want to read past that, that's fine too. Becoming of essence is not that long, to be honest. I'm thinking, yeah, let's read to the end of real measure for next time. And then the time after that, we'll just do the whole of chapter 3 because, I mean, it's literally 10 pages.
And then after that, no more deep hole gates.
Yeah. Well, he does have some writings on essence.
Yeah, but not deep hole gate. Like,
Yeah. Oh, I know. Well, he's working on it.
yeah.
Hopefully. I'm really hoping so anyway, because I gotta say, like his guide to the first book, Doctrine of Being, is fantastic. But if he came out with a fully detailed Doctrine of Essence guide, like this last one, I mean, that would be the real masterpiece. Like essence is the hardest part to get through, right? You think about being in its simplicity, right? All the way up to right up to the threshold of essence, and you're basically talking about the object phenomenologically. Okay, you got the object. In sense certainty, the first stage, you have to drop how you look at the object, because the immediate object that sense certainty is expecting turns out to be universal. So then it turns around and it says, yes, but I know that it's immediate. And that general thought is essence. Looking at yourself, right? And trying to say, I am, is it I am certain or I am immediate? I think it's I am certain. Damn it. Someone help me out here.
I haven't read phenomenology far enough yet.
Oh, okay. So the second experience of sense certainty, the dialectic of the I. So sense certainty now claims that it is conscious of something specific, not because its object is simple and immediate, which was the first experience, but because its own certainty is immediate, right? So you're looking at the essential factor, right? For sense certainty, the specificity and immediacy of the object before me are held in view by the immediacy of my seeing, my hearing, by the immediate certainty of the I. This means that the object I take myself to be certain of is itself subtly transformed. It is no longer merely this here now, but what I mean by this, what I know to be immediately present before me. Hegel notes, however, that in this relationship, sense certainty experiences the same dialectic acting upon itself as in the previous one. So, it falls by the wayside. Yeah, the problem, put simply, is this. If all I am aware of is what I mean by this, I do not actually have anything specific in mind for another I is equally conscious of what I mean by this. What I mean by this is thus just as vague and indeterminate as this here now. It remains beyond me what other eyes are certain of, and indeed what I myself am certain of at other times and in other places. By thinking of what I am immediately certain of, I think I have in mind something utterly specific to me, but the truth is that when I say I, this singular I say in general all eyes. Everyone is what I say. Everyone is I, this singular I. Like this here and now, therefore, the unspecified I proves to be an abstract, indeterminate universal. So it's basically the same result as when you looked at the object. Now you look at yourself, the I perceiving or sensing the thing, and you realize it's just as indeterminate, universal as the previous one. And you think about the shape of how this looks, and it's basically the essential, and how hard that is to get a grasp on. You know what I mean? And on top of this, Hegel also says that essence is basically the same as being. I mean, because it is, subject and object are the same. But that doesn't help when you get to essence and it basically says, so this is essence, but essence is exactly the same as being. Only instead of being, instead of is, you have as the helper verb. We're getting, I'm getting way ahead. Some of that's not going to make any sense, but I'm still trying to put it together. I think you guys know what I mean in terms of, because with Hegel, everything is three, right? You have the immediate, and you have the negation, and then you have the speculative, the notional moment, I guess you could call it. And that doesn't just occur, with the three books of the logic. It also occurs in the three experiences of every shape of consciousness in the phenomenology. And the first one is always the immediate, what consciousness takes its object to be, right? And that eventually is negated in the second experience. I'm still trying to put it together in my head, because with phenomenology, you look at the object and then you look at the subject and you find that both are not enough to figure out what the object actually is in its totality. And then you look at and then you look at a sort of unity of the two. But it's put differently in here, because what is it? The third experience of sense certainty is pointing. So basically, I point to the object, right? It's suddenly the I and the object are placed in a unity in consciousness experience. Yeah, you could almost call that a synthesis, but it's not exactly the same. Well, it's not the same as fictas at all. But when you get to the logic and you get to that speculative moment of all of these shapes, right? Consciousness experiences, thought thinks. That's kind of how I shorthand it. It's kind of hard to picture in your head how the verbs transfer over from experience to thinking, if that makes any sense.
Right.
Anyway, I'll have to do some more thought on that. We're at the end of our time, but gives you something to think about when you're reading through, because if you read at any one point in the phenomenology or the logic, you're gonna encounter generally the same process of immediacy, negation, and then the speculative dialectic. So there you go. All right. Everyone have a nice night. Remember to read until the end of chapter 2 for next time. Have a good night, comrades.
Right.